Hello, you. You're listening to A History of Italy. Episode 199, The Dying Gasp of the Florentine Republic and the First Duke.
Tra due salici piangenti, io ritrovo la speranza di un amore che ormai fu.
Before we start, I'd like to make the last call for contributions to episode 200. Remember, if you have a contribution, something you want to say, or a question you want to ask, you can send in a soundbite with your question or consideration, and we'll put it on the show. Or if you don't feel like recording, just write it and we'll read it on the next show, coming out on the 3rd of January. So please, contributions by the 31st of December. Over the last 3 episodes, we have been going back to help create the origin story of Cosimo of the House of Medici by following the adventures of his illustrious, albeit rather naughty, father, John of the Black Bands. Now that we have done that, we need to go back to Florence to see what was going on there. We last left the action with Pope Clement VII Giulio de Medici having reached a real low point with the sack of Rome, at the hands of a bunch of German landsknecht soldiers gone rogue. The event shocked the Western world and started up a blame game with many pointing the finger at the Pope himself. It was, of course, a pretty big shock for him too, and he was said to have aged very quickly in a short time, with his hair turning white. As a sign of mourning for the victims, he also grew a beard. If you add to this that Clement was about to have a pretty big argument with a certain Henry VIII, King of England, that would end in a rather nasty and permanent divorce, the overall record for his papacy is not great. The second Medici Pope may have lost one of the most powerful nations to leave Catholicism, but it was the previous Medici Pope, Leo X, Giovanni de Medici, under whom a movement started that would lead a whole other group of nations to break away from Catholicism. All in all, the record sheet for the Medici Pope boys doesn't look great. Things didn't really look great in 1527 to the Florentines. At the time, the Medici had re-established a sort of control over the Republic, still in the traditional vibe of, who, us? We're not the lords of Florence, just simple citizens who have the good of the Republic at heart. Yet now, things were a little more obvious. Perhaps Florence was really ready for a change. The low point of the Medici, with the shame of Clement VII after the sack of Rome, galvanized the anti-Medici factions in the Republic. The only issue was that being opposed to the Medici was the only significant thing keeping them together. There had already been a mini-rebellion even before the sack of Rome, when the imperial army that would then descend on the Eternal City passed by Florence. On that occasion, the short-lived revolt had resulted in the only damage being to Michelangelo's David, who got his arm broken when a bench was hurled out of the window. Clement's representative and sort of delegated ruler of Florence, Cardinal Silvio Passerini, managed to subdue the first spark of rebellion. It was after the sack, with Clement trapped in Castel Sant'Angelo, that things really got serious. The new spark was a rather verbally violent argument between Cardinal Passerini and a member of the Medici family, Clarice de Medici, who had married a member of the prominent Strozzi family and saw herself and her children as the legitimate Medici line. Indeed, she was the daughter of Piero the Unfortunate, son of Lorenzo the Magnificent. During the confrontation, a shot was fired somewhere in Palazzo Vecchio, and Clarice, fearing an assassination attempt, fled the palace. The next day, her husband, Filippo Strozzi, showed up with armed men, and the ruling regime, with no help coming from Clement, quietly raised their skirts and legged it. The anti-Medici forces took over and nominated Niccolò Capponi as Gonfaloniere, presiding over a new signoria that went back to the period of Girolamo Savonarola, influenced by the religious extremists who looked back fondly at the times of the priest. The name of the Gonfaloniere may not ring a bell, although his surname might. His father, Piero Capponi, had been the hero of the Republic when French King Charles VIII in 1494 was threatening to sound his horns and attack the city, and Capponi had threatened to sound the bells to defend it. The new glory of the Capponi lasted just over a year, with Niccolò being deposed in 1529 when the initial Republican authorities, dominated by the nobility, gave way to more radical popular forces. Popular meaning the non-noble rich. Cracks were starting to show in the anti-Medici front. Capponi was accused of having been in contact with the Pope, which he had been. The council which presided over his trial could not reach a legal quorum, and so Niccolò Capponi got out of it, having to pay a hefty fine, but with his life. In an unusual turn of events, the minority of fanatical religious nostalgics of Savonarola on the 9th of February 1529 managed to get Jesus Christ himself nominated King of the Florentine Republic. 1529 marked the start of the end of the new version of the Republic when Clement VII and Holy Roman Emperor Charles V kissed and made up at the Treaty of Barcelona. This agreement included a clause by which the emperor would help the Medici get back into Florence. An imperial army was sent to besiege the city. Interestingly, the man put in charge of improving the defensive structures was Michelangelo. He then fled during the preparations, one of those who felt that the desire of the more intransigent members of the Republic to resist was folly. Unfortunately for the resist-at-all-costs faction, the general commander of the Florentines, Malatesta Baglioni, was also one of the doubtful and later accused of treachery. To show their spirit of resistance, the Florentines continued to try and maintain the routine of life as usual. When the Arno froze over, a game of ball commenced, with an inflated ox stomach being passed across the frozen river. The traditional Florentine football game for Carnival was held in defiance of the besiegers. The 25 whites of the Santo Spirito district played the 25 greens of Santa Croce in the square of Santa Croce. This was a rather violent, no-holds-barred version of soccer, which can still be seen to this day if you Google historic Florentine football. There was no attempt to keep things low-key, with trumpeters on the roof of Santa Croce. From one of their positions on the hill overlooking the city, the imperial besiegers aimed a cannon shot at the game, but it flew over, causing no damage. In the end, despite the spirit of the Florentines, in August of 1530, reduced in number by famine and plague, the city capitulated. The terms were not too harsh, and Clement managed to intervene to keep the imperial troops outside of the city and avoid any trouble. It is at this point that the ever-invisible power of the Medici became very visible when Alessandro de Medici, named a Duke of Penne in the Kingdom of Naples, was now named Gonfalonier for life. It was only when an impressive fortress over the river from Palazzo Vecchio was completed upon the location of Palazzo Pitti that the move was made to make him Duke of the Florentine Republic, a rather contradictory title at best. As a sign of how the situation in Italy had changed and was now fully dependent on foreign powers, the communication came from the emperor and not the Florentine authorities. The centuries-old Florentine Republic was definitively dead. So the question now is, who was this Alessandro de Medici guy who went down in history as the first Duke of the short-lived Duchy of Florence? Well, the official line went something like this. Cosimo the Elder begat Piero of the Gout, who begat Lorenzo the Magnificent, who begat Piero the Useless, who begat Lorenzo, Duke of Urbino, who begat Alessandro illegitimately with a woman, possibly mixed race, named Simonetta da Collevecchio, who seems to have been a servant of Alfonsina Orsini, wife of Piero the Useless. I know that's a lot, just remember that, aside from his illegitimacy, Alessandro was more or less a continuation of the direct Medici line from Cosimo the Elder. Another possibility was that Alessandro was born from Cardinal Giulio de Medici, later Clement VII, and Simonetta, or another servant of African origin. Whatever the case may be, Alessandro's dark complexion gave him the nickname Il Moro, the Moor. He was made Duke on the 27th of April 1532, after his stint as Gonfalonier. The revenge on the Republican faction had already begun. Many members of the Republican government and its supporters were either killed or exiled. Some Republican administrative structures were maintained, but in general it was very clear who the new boss in town was. The office of Gonfalonier and the Signoria were abolished. A new council of 200 and other bodies were created. You may be wondering at this point what sort of Duke Alessandro was. Well, this is a good example of the consequence of choosing sides, and in particular the side that writes history. It seemed that Alessandro favoured the lower classes, perhaps remembering his own lowly birth. He was not above getting involved in a game of Florentine football, and once, when his nose was bloodied, he refused any help but simply went off to the side to clean himself up and then got back in the game. He would not dress or behave ostentatiously so as to give an example that no one should overesteem their rank. Speaking of clothes, he was quoted as saying that a prince should prefer to go naked rather than nude others in order to clothe himself. Having said this, he was not averse to taking taxes from citizens from the richest down to the most poverty-stricken. Also, he didn't mind getting naked, but he was a fan of expensive perfumes. You might say all he wore to bed was a drop of Chanel No. 5 or whatever passed for it at the time. Furthermore, he had no issues reducing the minor guilds from 14 to 4 to save on bureaucratic costs. He was a strong believer in justice, something that even his most strenuous opposers credited him with, and he had law codes translated into the vernacular so that even the less educated could be familiar with them and not get cheated. He was all for justice, but would not hear of freedom. He wanted to make it very clear that the whole free Florentine Republic business was all over, and even had the bell on the Arnolfo Tower, a symbol of the Republic, thrown down and melted. It was enough to just be heard talking about the idea of restoring the Republic to get you killed. The presence of the proto-police force of the Duke under a certain Ser Maurizio di Milano was very strong in this sense. Alessandro was quite paranoid about the Republican sentiment among the populace and banned anyone except his police from bearing arms. He was, you might say, a friend of the lower classes to a certain extent, but when it came to the noble families, he was quite unscrupulous and even brutal, not hesitating to accuse them and have them imprisoned or even killed so that he could take their wealth and estates. He even took to extending sentences of exile from 1530 to 33 and then to 36 to have more time to take control of their assets. A lot of this was to get the economy of the new duchy back on its feet after a big hit from the losses of the siege, the continuous incursions, and the rise of Flanders as a competitor to Florence on the English market. Then again, a lot of it was to indulge Alessandro in his favourite hobbies, hunting, sport, and most of all, loads and loads of sex, with a preference for women having to do with religion. In short, he had a sort of nun fetish. Young, old, married, spinster, lay, or of the cloth, it made no difference to the Duke. This, among many other things, was what the increasingly vociferous opposition was accusing him of, and then in 1534 he lost his greatest protector, Pope Clement VII. The opposition rallied around another possible contender to the throne of the duchy, Ippolito de Medici, whom Clement had tried to keep out of contention by making him a cardinal. This apparent favoritism towards Alessandro had furthered the suspicion of those who believed that he was Clement's illegitimate son. I won't spend too much time getting you acquainted with Ippolito, as he died at only 24 in 1535, most likely poisoned by an emissary of Duke Alessandro. Ippolito had been on his way to take a petition to the Emperor Charles V to denounce the abuse of power of Alessandro. A trial did ensue in Naples, with the Florentine exile Filippo Strozzi as the prosecutor and Francesco Guicciardini, Florentine politician and historian, defending Alessandro, acting in the Duke's defense. He was found not guilty. The opposition to Alessandro would have to find another way to get rid of him. In the end, someone did it for them. For his various party and sexual escapades, Duke Alessandro had a close frat boy buddy, yet another Medici and yet another Lorenzo. Luckily, this guy, who was a skinny lad, had a nickname Lorenzino, meaning a little Lorenzo. The two had been through a lot together, and Alessandro trusted and was very attached to his friend. After an evening of partying during the Epiphany, the 6th of January of 1537, Lorenzo told the Duke that he had organized a surprise to finish off the evening's festivities by bringing a woman to his bed, It seems that among the possible ladies in question whom Alessandro had been promised was Lorenzino's auntie, Caterina Soderini. He left the Duke lying on his bed in excited anticipation. When he came back, he was not accompanied by a woman, but by a thug named Michele del Tavolacino, nicknamed Scoronconcolo. Apparently, the Duke looked like he was sleeping because Lorenzino is supposed to have said, "Are you sleeping, my lord?" And then, without waiting for an answer, he put a hand over the Duke's mouth and stabbed him. I suppose that was an effective way of knowing if he was faking sleep. Alessandro immediately sprang up, biting Lorenzino's hand. A struggle ensued, with Lorenzino ironically telling the Duke that he had nothing to fear. That is when Scoronconcolo fell upon him and finished him off. When his body was later discovered, the assassins having fled, the murder was kept a secret for as long as possible, the body being quietly taken to the Medici crypt at San Lorenzo. This was to give the Florentines time to find a solution to the succession before news reached the emperor and he enacted his own solution. It is not known why exactly Lorenzino de Medici assassinated the Duke. Perhaps he had offended him in some way. Perhaps he too harboured misguided ideals of re-establishing the old republic, or perhaps he had just grown sick and tired of Alessandro. The bottom line was, the first Duke of the Republic of Florence was no more, and nothing makes it more difficult to establish a new duchy like your own death. Thank you very much for listening. Stay tuned for the sketch after the credits. A History of Italy is a Sentire Media podcast created and hosted by me, Mike Corradi, and produced by my wonderful, superb Patreon supporters, whom I would like to thank, starting from the first third of the Margherita Hack and Galileo Galilei level, and they are Alison H., Annie, Aurora T., Benjamin W., Karsten, Catherine C., C. Lane, Cindy M., Chris H., Cospia Fanboy, David M., Dean V., Demetrio M., Dennis K., Dennis S., Dominique T., Edward J., Edward S., Emily B., and Eric W. Of course, we cannot forget our tippy-top Maria Montessori and Dante Alighieri level Lisa K., Peter W., David L., David C., Sen, David A., Karen D., Bridget T., Dallas R., Joseph V., Stephen G., and Julian. Thank you very much. If you too would like to become a Patreon supporter and have access to extra content, for example, for Christmas, the Patreon supporters are getting a bonus episode in collaboration with two important podcasters, then all you have to do is go to ahistoryofitaly.com and click through to our support page where you'll find the Patreon button. There you can also find the PayPal button for a one-off donation and also Tippy if you so wish. Thank you very, very much. Please don't hesitate also just to get in touch, which is always great. hello@historyofitaly.com or follow us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Once again, thank you very much for listening. And until next time, arrivederci.
This way, in the bedroom. He thinks you're my auntie.
What? How on earth would he think that? I'm a big burly man and your auntie is lovely. He must be dumber than they say.
No, I don't think he thinks that you are my auntie. I mean, he thinks that my auntie is coming and not you.
Ah, so I'm not welcome here then?
Well, of course you're not welcome. You've come here to assassinate the guy.
Well, that's not reason to be rude. If he's so unhospitable, no wonder people want him dead. I know when I'm not welcome.
Where are you going?
Leaving. I may be a big thug, but I have feelings too, you know.
What? Will you stop this nonsense?
Oh, now I'm talking nonsense, am I?
No, look, I'm sorry, okay? You're very welcome here and you don't talk nonsense.
You mean it?
Yes, from the bottom of my heart. Now let's go.
Okay.
Through here.
I could do it, you know.
Do what?
Pass for someone's auntie. Not yours, of course. She's gorgeous, but somebody's slightly plump auntie.
Could you now?
Yes, I could look very pretty if I wanted.
Really?
Don't you believe me?
I mean, I'm sure you can look stunning, but, let's get this done.
Okay, but you don't sound like you really mean it.
Are you awake, my lord? Stab.
Ah, I am now. Couldn't you have just pinched me or something? Why did you actually say stab?
Well, it sounded right. Also, ow, you bit my hand.
Well, you stabbed me.
You have nothing to fear, my lord.
Well, that doesn't certainly seem so. Who is this oaf? Where's your auntie?
Well, there's no need to be rude.
No need to be rude? So it's polite to stab people to see if they're awake?
Well, that's not the reason I stabbed you.
Why did you then?
Well, to assassinate you.
I thought you said I had nothing to fear.
Well, I didn't want to alarm you now.
Well, that plan went out the window, didn't it? I can assure you that getting a blade stuck in you is more than a bit alarming.
If I may interject here.
What?
Well, considering I could never be passed off as his auntie because she's amazing.
Oh, you can say that again.
Yeah. But don't you think I could have passed for someone else less attractive, auntie?
Well, I suppose with the right dress, maybe some makeup in a certain light, you could be quite pretty.
Aw, I wish I didn't have to assassinate you.
Must you?
Well, in for a penny, in for a florin.
Well, I suppose that makes sense.
You're one of the nicest people I've ever had pleasure of brutally and repeatedly stabbing.
Ah, well, how kind.